So, how do you think what is happening currently with the protests, is it affecting your job on a day-to-day basis as a historian?
Yes. It's making me a lot more cognizant of the Black voices that I represent. Mm-hmm. So, I went from being the only Black person at Belle Meade to one of 3 Black people at Belle Meade, and then I left and became one of 3 Black people at the Tennessee State Museum, mm-hmm. and we're really 4. But there's this understood, unspoken thing that Black people have where we know there's certain stuff we can't say. So when you start to have conversations about how museums are ran and how Black people and minorities feel as employees at institutions that are predominantly white, it has made me a lot more cognizant of how other Black people feel. Mm. And the fact that these issues are not isolated. Black people at institutions across America are facing the same issues on a day-to-day basis, and those issues are very simple. There's a lack of leadership, Black leadership on executive levels at museums and institutions of cultural learning. Mm-hmm. It's just a thing. Mm-hmm. There is a lack of Black people on curatorial staffs across America. There's a lack of Black people in a higher level interpretive staff across America. So when there is not representation for the Black experience, you're going to run into issues of Black historiography, Black interpretation, Black history in general, because there's no one to speak to the lived experience. Mm-hmm. And when you only have 1 to 2 Black people, those 1 to 2 Black people are going to be kind of afraid to say how they feel because they still need a job at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So some of the belief systems that our institutions uphold, please be aware. The Black people on your staff probably do not agree with them. They're just too afraid to lose their job to say anything.
People ask you questions and for historical perspective in it, find that difficult sometimes, I would think, because they're probably looking to you to represent. It's kind of like I don't represent all white people.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's a thing. It's a real thing. And I don't think it's done intentionally. I think it's just a part of the process. It's okay, well, we only have 1 Black person. So if we have a question about Black people, we got to go ask the Black person. So you kind of do it inherently. You're not trying to. But I do a lot of work to make sure that I say that. So within the Black world, there's this need to kind of be the token. You kind of have to walk a certain way and talk a certain way. You have to code switch so much, and you kind of feel you have to blend. You have to assimilate in a certain regard, and with that, in many cases, you will lose some of the things that make your Black experience authentic. So for example, on the simplistic basis, my hair. So there are a lot of Black people, specifically Black people from the generations before millennials, so Generation X and baby boomers, who still believe that it is unprofessional for you to wear your hair natural or for you to have braids. They feel like it is professional for you to straighten your hair. Mm. So in regards to this, me being a millennial Black person who is very, very pro my natural hair, how it grows out of my head, whether it be kinky, curly, or coily, or braided, I should be able to wear my hair without altering it, unless I so choose. Mm-hmm. So when you start to kind of look at how we use Black people to represent all Black people, I'm very, very forthright with the fact that I am a Black girl who comes from an urban environment. I did not go to a prep school, because a lot of the Black people that are able to reach the levels that I have reached are the Black people that have the best education, and they went to the best college, and they were in the best organizations, and they still kind of have fit this this kind of like white mold of what exceptionalism is and what success is. And I'm the polar opposite of all that. Like, I come from a very Black city and a very Black family, and we do very Black things. We play a lot of spades, and there's a lot of taking shots and a lot of cursing across tables while people play dominoes. Like, it's Black as Black can be. But I feel like that is good, because what white people need to see is Black people in their authenticity, confidently in their authenticity, so that people can stop saying things like, oh, but you're so articulate, as if I can't be both very Black and very articulate, as if I can't come from the hood and be articulate. Black communities are multifaceted. There's nerds, they're jocks, they're geeks, you know, like all of these things exist in Black communities, and for some reason we've never seen that.
Well, it makes me think about the interpretation, you know, for so long, like when you're talking about slavery, I think when we're talking about African-American history, it's like people just say enslaved people, and then you don't really start thinking about the individual people still.
Yes.
Like that there was, you know, at Vance, there was Venus and there was Leah and Jim, and there were all these different people, and they all had different personalities, and that hasn't changed through time. Like, people were different then, and they're different now. So it's kind of interesting interpretively what we do when we're, you know, interpreting all history, not even just African American history, but that we will group people and think, you know, there's identity that's lost. I do think it happens more with, obviously,
and you see that struggle a lot with the types of narratives that have been preserved at a lot of plantation museums. Typically, the narratives that were preserved are going to be the narratives that kind of reinforce the idea that there were good slave owners, without a deep exploration of the psychological ramifications of long-term enslavement. If I kidnap you and take you from your house and make you live with me for the next 50 years, but I treat you halfway decent, eventually you probably would give an interview and say, you know what, yeah, they took me, but, you know, they feed me, they clothe me, they don't beat me too often, you know, it ain't so bad, you know, they all right sometimes. Does that mean that morally it was okay? And for some reason, there's a disconnect there, so.
Yeah. See, some of the comments we get on social media are just, it's. No, I love the comments. I think for people who thought that racism like went away, A, I don't know how you thought racism went away. And B, if you want to know if it did or didn't, just go visit the comment section on any post pertaining to the Black Lives Matter movement. You see the heart of America in the comments. It's sad, but I find very, very much interest in it. But honestly, because people seem to feel a certain level of comfort with typing their true feelings. Very few people are going to be racist to your face. And I know that even from when I would give Journey to Jubilee, I only had, if even, a handful of negative experiences. Like, if you don't like it, like, you would always have, it's always going to be like one or two people who probably didn't like read the description of the tour they bought. They just like bought a tour and then get here and they're like, oh, so this is like an hour and a half all about slavery? And you can always tell who those people are because they usually stand in the corner the whole time, like with their arms folded, like pouting. And it got to the point where I would, when the tour began, say, let people know kind of how we talked about like Maslow's theory. I would Maslow people in that way. I would say, you know, this is going to be uncomfortable. I am not here to pat your back, at least until the end. There are tissues if you need them, and if you need to take a step outside, I feel you. Yeah. And this is where we at with it. So where do we go from here? Yeah.
And you would get a lot of people that would leave at that point if they didn't want to continue. But for the most part, it would usually be a couple. That one person really wanted to be there and like one person didn't. And the person that wasn't very happy with the content is the person that's going to sit here off in the corner. But usually what I found is that I could think that they're not into it. And then by the end of it, they're like, you taught me a lot. Like I never thought about how all of these things were intertwined. Like I knew that Black people were still mad about slavery, but I never really understood why, because for some reason there's a consensus in a lot of white communities that we should just get over it without looking at the things that have been done over time to continue the systemic issues that are a result of slavery. So you can't talk about slavery and then not talk about Reconstruction. And you definitely can't talk about Reconstruction without talking about the establishment of Jim Crow.
Right.
You can't talk about Jim Crow without talking about racism, period. And then you can't talk about Jim Crow without talking about the Civil Rights Movement. Because everybody likes to talk about Martin Luther King. I've been seeing these posts about like how people should peacefully protest, and Martin Luther King peacefully protested. And I'm like, and you killed him. So he marched down the street peacefully, sat in restaurants at lunch counters peacefully, and let people pour mustard and ketchup and coffee and tea on him peacefully. He was sprayed with water hoses by the fire department of Birmingham, Mobile, and everybody else, and he had dogs sicked on him by police forces, and he was put in jail, and he peacefully did his protest, but he was met with violence. So why now are we asking for peace? I don't get it.
Yeah. We interpret a mountain plantation.
Very different.
Very different. And so people assume that plantations and slavery didn't exist in the mountains a lot. So that's mainly what we're dealing with on a daily basis, is just helping people understand that it did exist, but it was just different than what they're probably envisioning as far as a plantation. And the whole Gone with the Wind thing. But I find that people don't want to come to the site. What we've had in the past is people won't want to come to the site because they think we don't talk about slavery, or they don't want to come to the site because we do talk about slavery. Like,
I know. It's a very tricky space.
I don't know how to fix that. But, you know, I guess I'm wondering, you know, someone who's in the field who talks about this kind of history all the time, and that it's very much a history that is impacting us still today, constantly. Do you find, like, do you get pushback from the African-American community for what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Especially very early on when people didn't really understand like what my purpose was. Even for my parents, like I have a joke from an old interview that says, my mama said that I was going to set us back 400 years. And yeah, when I first started at Bellmead, I won't say that they weren't happy, but they were very skeptical of it with very obvious reasons. Black people don't know how to feel about slavery, because on one hand, it's like if you were a kid in high school and you got bullied all the time, but eventually you grew up and became really popular. I try to give like very realistic.
I'm with you. Okay, I'm there. You were bullied. Now you're the popular kid. Continue.
Now you're the popular kid, and you don't really like to think back on when you were the weaker one. Slavery and racism has affected Black people's sense of self-image. Your sense of self-image, your sense of self-worth, your sense of self-respect. Because essentially you had, nobody respected you when you were in slavery. Nobody respected you when you were living through Jim Crow. It was a very popular thing for white men to refer to grown Black men, old Black men, as boy. there's a quote in a Maya Angelou poem that says, 70 years in these folks' world, and the child I work for calls me girl.
Mm.
There was no respect. So Black people don't like to look back at that time because it hurts. And it reminds you of a period in time where white people could do anything to you and there was nothing that you could do about it.
Mm.
There was nothing you could do but accept it and swallow it and deal with it as best as you know how.
Yeah.
And so today, to have to look back at that history when we have so much, there's so many Black rich people now, that there's more Black rich people than America has ever seen. Imagine how it must feel to accomplish all of these things, but at the end of the day, have to be reminded that at one point you were nothing.
Mm.
So you have those Black people. They don't want to talk about slavery because I'm not a slave today.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the Black people like me who is very cognizant of why Black people don't want to talk about it, but very understanding of the fact that their history, those people did not have a voice, and we have to speak for them. We have to correct their story. We have to tell their story. We have to make sure that the world knows that we may have been victims to a circumstance, but we were not victims.
Mm-hmm.
We were still able to carve out communities and dreams and goals and aspirations and blessings out of that. And it was hard. It's still hard, but we're still doing it. And we cannot just can't forget about these people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all about perspective. Slavery just hurts. Black history hurts. Black history is painful.
Mm-hmm.
American history is painful. It's all the same history. We choose to separate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing that I really don't like about the Vance Birthplace. It is separated in our exhibit. It was finished right before I started, and I already have things that I would change about it. And it's new, and it's better than it was, but it does have this. It's like all Vance, which it's the Vance Birthplace, but his story touches so many lives and has such an impact, good and bad. Lots of bad. But there's one panel on the enslaved people. It's like the segregated panel, and every day I see it and I'm like, ugh. Like, where can the interpretation go next, right? Like, instead of, like, right now I'm thinking, okay, well, like, let's stop with the segregated panels of, like, okay, the enslaved people are here on this panel, but they are a thread throughout the whole thing. But, like, how do we work that into even more of our tours, and, like, what's next, interpretively? What are the next big things that are going to be happening, and different ways to think about it, I
think a true balanced interpretation should be our next goal. It should be to our goal should be to be able to talk about the full history without glorifying the Confederacy and without demeaning Black people. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be tricky because most of these, a good majority of these plantation museums especially, are owned and operated in one way or another by the descendants of these slave-owning families.
Right. So
how can you get them to honestly look at their ancestor and say, yeah, kind of a racist?
Yeah.
And how do you not only get them to admit that, but to allow you as an institution interpreting this person's life to interpret that truth? Mm-hmm. How do you get them on board for something like that? Black people down for it, I can tell you now. But I think that's one time I'll speak for us.
I do think it's going to take, it's going to take some ownership from, say, a descendant or someone in those particular instances of just understanding that. I think the reason people don't like it is because they feel personally like attacked, probably. They're like, oh, well, if
That's why
you're racist, then I feel like you're saying I'm racist. And it's like, well,
are you?
I mean,
But see, that's
impacted. Like, you were impacted and grew up in a world, and your ancestors, you have a life. You had the same way that slavery trickled and impacted African Americans today.
Yeah.
Like, there was the same line happening with white people. There were our descendants of racist people that were impacting what you do today. And so I think until white people are recognizing that same line that's happening and being able to say, like, okay, like, internally, deep thoughts, these are things that have impacted me and are causing me to think a certain way, because you can't change it until you recognize that you do it. And everybody wants to say, like, oh, I'm not racist, and it's like,
yeah, but I feel like more people should be honest about it. Like, no, seriously, like, you don't have to tell me, but at some point, like, you don't have to, like, go up to the next Black person you see and be like, hi, I too am a racist, and I just want to know how I cannot be. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to do that. You can really just sit in your house one day and ask yourself a very hard question.
Yeah.
Am I racist? And racism doesn't always mean that you out marching in white sheet with a Nazi flag, which I still don't understand why they fly, but that's another conversation. But
that's another quarantine to say.
That's a whole nother, like, series.
Let's have another series just on flags. We can.
And why you carry the ones that you do, because I'm just tell y'all.
I used to joke all the time, sidebar, that I was just going to start flying a flag in Vance that was just like kittens. Just, like one of those yard flags with like kittens and puppies on it. I was just going to put it up and be like, but how can you hate kittens?
Because you can't hate kittens. Like, you should do puppies and kittens in case you got like some anti-kitten people out here.
There probably are anti-kitten people. Or
yeah. I think my fiance may be anti-kitten. He don't really like cats, but
okay, puppies.
You got to do equality, puppies and kittens. Now,
anyway, we were talking about racism, and
got it. Back on track. So you have to ask yourself a question: just, am I racist? And racism doesn't always exhibit itself as a KKK robe. It's questions like, when the Black girl sat next to me at Fridays, did I clutch my purse because for some inherent reason I felt like she was gonna steal from me? When the Black guy walked to his car that was parked next to you, did you lock your door because for some reason you had no reason, but for some reason you thought that he may rob you? When the Black guy got on the elevator, did you like scoot into a corner? Were you inherently afraid? Why were you inherently afraid? These types of things, like these are the internal racist notions that white people hold, that white people need to be able to address. And then once you start addressing those internal biases, then you have to ask yourself a question about, where did they come from? See, that's when it starts to get tricky, because you start having to address systems and structures, and systems and structures don't like truth.
Right. And this is why I think, the role that museums and historic sites is so important. I mean, because it's starting, people are coming to us, even at the Vance Birthplace or Belle Meade or whatever, and they need to, our goal is that when they leave, they understand, at least begin to just think about the fact that slavery and what Zebulon Vance said or Zebulon Vance did, it trickled down and is affecting. Yeah. That's where, it's starting. These things that you're feeling, they have a root somewhere.
Yes, but until we address the root, people are afraid of the root, because the root is rooted in the establishment of America. So until we begin to actively address why America was founded, and then address how was America founded, who was included in that founding, and then who was not. That is the foundation that we have to first address, because everything built upon that. Everything built upon the establishment of the Constitution. America's original sin is what they did to the Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
That's America's original sin. It's misquoted that slavery is America's original sin. It's not. Slavery is America's second sin. So first you got to address what you did to the Native American people.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you literally, the European culture, and I'm specific, Spanish and European culture, well, the Spanish are a little bit different because they came here to explore. But the European culture essentially came here fleeing persecution.
Mm-hmm.
They were fleeing a caste system. They were fleeing classism. And then came over here and established the same system they were fleeing. I don't get it. And not only do you come and establish that system, you bring people with you to a house that was already occupied. Right. So it's like if I come to your house and I call you, because, you know, after so long, they had a relationship with Native Americans. I call you and say, hey, I'm coming over today. You are not going to be very happy if I show up with 12 other people.
Yeah.
So when we have the conversation of nationality and immigration, I always wonder, what do the Native Americans think? I guarantee you they are somewhere on the reservation saying, I wish they would all go home.
Yep. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. So we will be quarantined historiating until 9:00 tonight if we talked about everything that needs to be talked about.
I know. What's one really good public history experience you had, interpretation experience, where at the end of the day you were like, this is why I do this?
The Whitney Museum. The Whitney Plantation Museum in Louisiana, right outside of New Orleans. I think it's Edgar, Louisiana. Don't quote me on that. Google it. But the best interpretive experience I've ever had. My tour guide's name was Ali. Shout out to Ali. If you still work at the Whitney, you are doing an amazing, amazing, amazing job. And as soon as I start running my own museum, I got a job for you, my friend. Amazing. Not only is the interpretation fully centered around enslavement and the legacy of slavery in that area of Louisiana, their interpretation is also focusing on the long-term effects of enslavement in that community. How did it affect the people in this community? How have they changed? How have they grown? Have they grown? It was amazing, absolutely amazing. Took full ownership of what slavery was, and talked about not just slavery in the sense that we had enslaved people on the property, but they also talked about how they rebelled, how they fought back, how they were not victims just in the sense of the poor Black people. What did they do to emancipate themselves? It was amazing. Full-bodied interpretation. I encourage anybody to go.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it. I haven't been able to go, but someday I'll make it there. When the pandemic
made me cry. I don't cry easily at plant. Yeah, I don't cry easily, but I shed a tear too. I was like, powerful. Yeah.
Good. Well, is there anything else that you want to talk about before we go or add? Like I said, we'll do it again because obviously we could.
So much. I miss you so much. We haven't
had one. I know. I want a reunion.
We need one. I need coronavirus to go away. Oh my God. So ready to just be interpreting this as a piece of history. It's like, and it was that one time the world ended. How did they do this during the Spanish flu? Like there was no Instagram, there was no Zoom.
So I think a really cool exhibit would be on communication, like looking at how did people communicate from, during that versus now with like social media and the computer. Yeah. I think it'd be fascinating.
It would, to compare the two. Oh God, I would love it.
And what were people like? What were they saying? If they're sending a letter during the Spanish flu, what are they writing about? Because right now it's like, would people be writing about, or people are like posting about how they're like just making bread all the time and stuff?
No.
They are. They're like, what am I going to do today? I think some sourdough bread sounds good.
seen so many people baking bread.
Why are they all baking bread?
I can't cook, so I buy everything. But no, it's they're really making a lot of like sourdough bread. Sourdough must be easy.
I'm gonna have to look into this.
My closing statement is very simple. If you're watching this and you are a person who has in some way struggled with learning African American history because the content is hard, if you struggle with guilt about what the legacy of America is, I encourage you to deal with it head on. Do not passively deal with it. Deal with it fully, completely, and ask yourself, what can I do to no longer be a part of the problem? It is no longer enough to just not be racist. At this point, you have to be actively anti-racist. What are you doing to affect and change the system? You can't just be an ally because you don't have a personal problem with Black people. Right. You have to be an ally by amplifying Black voices and also by checking your white friends. Mm-hmm. If you have and entertain white people who uphold racist beliefs and ideals, it is your responsibility to check them. Mm-hmm. It is not my responsibility to educate you on how to not be racist because I'm not racist. It's your responsibility to educate yourself on how to not be racist and educate your people. Mm-hmm. That's all I got.
That is a great closing statement. I love it.
This has been awesome.
It's been so good to see you.
I know. Likewise.
I really appreciate it. You taking the time, and I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Of course. Thank you again, and I appreciate it.
All right. You have a good day.
You too. Stay safe. Wear your mask.
You too. Bye.